little point of translation in verse 19, in which also Jesus went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, not the spirits now in prison. No word there now. They're trying to lead you on. They're trying to make you think that Jesus went and preached to human beings in the day of Noah, who were alive as human beings when he preached to them, but are now in prison. That's fatally wrong. First of all, Jesus wasn't alive to preach at all in the time of Noah. And so you don't have the word now there in the Greek. It's simply without the now. You don't need the now. They're pushing you into a particular view with adding the word now. I'll repeat the point. It's complicated until you think about this, but they're trying to get you to believe that Jesus preached to human beings at the time of Noah who are now in prison, but they weren't in prison when they were preached to. So there are a number of things wrong with that. First, in our understanding, Jesus wasn't alive to do any preaching. He wasn't even born, so he couldn't have preached. Aren't they say he preached in the lips of Noah? Well, that's pretty bad too. It doesn't say that. Nothing about Noah preaching here. And Jesus was not alive to do any preaching in the time of Noah. That's quite clear. Secondly, then, you cannot preach to dead human beings. This is where your conditional immortality, believing the dead are dead, is a rescue from massive error, right? You cannot preach to somebody who's dead. Nor can Jesus preach to anybody when he's dead. Is that clear? These are basics that without which it's very difficult to get clarity here. So he was nobody without his body. That's what it is. So you cannot preach to the dead human beings because they are unconscious. And Jesus cannot preach when he wasn't alive in the time of Noah. And he cannot preach when Jesus is dead. Without those premises, though, this is a big fog. Believe me. And all the commentators, many of them, are completely in disagreement about much of this. I don't think it's that hard. Yeah. Jesus wasn't alive there, so forget that. It says nothing about Jesus preaching through the lips of Noah. No, that's not right. And you cannot preach to dead people. And Jesus, when he was dead, cannot preach either. This is to show that doctrine matters very much. If you haven't got that framework right, then this is a grand muddle, and it is in the commentaries. And they're also suggesting that mortal human beings who are dead can be preached to, and they're also suggesting that Jesus could have preached when he was dead before he was resurrected. So you've got four different things, really, which are made clear if you get this right, I think. This is the one to bring to the attention of your friends in the Baptist Church. It says the dead know not anything at all. The living know they're going to die. Well, that's quite unarguable, isn't it? We all know that we're going to die. That's why I'm saying, what will we be doing in 40 trillion years? That's a greater question. Okay, so the dead know nothing at all. And you can embroider that with your Georgian. I won't do it because that's insulting to the beautiful Georgian southern language, but they don't know nothing about nothing. Anyway, that's clear. Is it clear? Let's not argue that. The dead do not know anything. And then 5 verses later, he says, there is no knowledge in Sheol. Sheol is a good Hebrew word to know. Hades in the Greek. Sheol and Hades. There's no knowledge or activity in Sheol or Hades, whichever one. That's where all the dead are. It's gravedom. The whole area of the dead seen as one grave. Nothing's going on there. That ought to be clear, but people are so tied and wedded to their own churches. Now, John is way beyond what most people would handle. They always want to do John. You start with the Old Testament and get Matthew, Mark, and Luke right first, and you can deal with John. There is a sense in which resurrection, or being raised spiritually, happens now. That's true. It already is. And you could say that Jesus raised some from the dead. Even then, he did. But the hour is coming in the future when all the rest of the dead are going to come alive. And then people stumble at Revelation 20, which clearly says that the first resurrection is only for the faithful. So the verse to teach your children is 1 Corinthians 15:23, which gives the battle order of resurrection, where Paul spells it out. You cannot get this wrong. Should not. Paul says that Christ was the first to be raised from the dead. Marvelous. Okay, well, what about those people who got raised from the dead in the Old Testament? That wasn't resurrection to immortality. That was resurrection simply to extended life. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. The time is coming when those who are hearing the voice of the Son of Man speak to them, and they're in the grave, and they're going to wake up. And Jesus is the first to have done that. He's the only one so far. Let's argue about only one. Let's not. You all understood. Jesus is the only one who has been raised to immortality thus far. Is that right? Nobody else. Then he says, after that, he doesn't say then. Your translation is wrong. He says then, meaning the next moment. No, no. After that next stage, the Greek is quite expressive. The next stage of resurrection is those who belong to Christ will be raised at his parousia, second coming. Only one second coming, that's very clear. That's when the resurrection of all the faithful will happen. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets will be there, resurrected into the kingdom, and that will happen at the parousia, second coming. No pre-tribulation rapture, that's a fiction, not there at all. That's at the parousia. Then he says, next stage comes the end, presumably in this context, the end of the resurrection scheme. That would be, as you know from Revelation 20, at the end of the 1,000 years, the rest of the dead get to be raised. And some then, even in that group, are given eternal life. That's the wider hope that we talk about. That's very clear. If you haven't got that structure, your Bible reading is a mess. And I, in the Church of England, had no idea about any of this. I'm not blaming anybody, but we didn't know any of this. So Christianity is, first of all, understanding God's great plan, his immortality plan. You might ask your questions this: what is the big question in the Bible? The answer is not only that God's going to have a wonderful earth that he's going to give to you. Secondly, it is that the words of God and Jesus are the defining factor. All this argument about, is it by faith or works, and what's all that about? Not that hard. It's by obedience to the words of God, period. The whole issue in the Bible is, do you listen to what God says and do it, or don't you? Do you listen to what Jesus, as God's representative, says, do you do it? That's all. Obedience of faith, obedience of faith, obedience of faith. But people are not using these easy verses. It's from the start, Adam and Eve didn't listen, right? And Adam did not then take the challenge to rule the world. That's what he was created for. So guess what? Jesus comes along as the second Adam and says, repent and believe in the kingdom. Of course, let's get the Adam's thing straightened out, right? Do what Adam failed to do. So it's a kingdom message. It's what, are you going to listen to God or not? This is rather simple, and I think the Bible is written for ordinary folk. You don't need PhDs in theology to do this, but they don't use the easy verses most of the time. Really hitting at the heart of Platonism. And so this Greek here, soma pneumatikon, that's a body which is spiritual, sounds like a contradiction. It's not, because God doesn't deal in invisible, non-corporeal things. That has to go out of the window, before he starts this. So absolutely, that's a rare expression, but it's right. Then what does he say? That Jesus has now become a life-imparting spirit. A spirit person. He is a spirit person, no question. But he's imparting life. He not only has life, but he's imparting it to others. That's what Jesus now is, as an immortalized man. Jesus is now a life-imparting spirit. So he was indeed resurrected to be a life-imparting spirit. But it is hard, but the Platonism is killing us. Plato has so saturated our minds with that. But don't forget the one that Jesus is now a life-imparting spirit, meaning a non-mortal human person, but he's still corporeal, obviously, otherwise he can't come back visibly. Yes. Messiah died. He couldn't be God, you tell your friends. The immortal God cannot die, this is verse 18. Messiah also died for sins. Once for all, it doesn't have to be repeated, the just for the unjust. That I would call substitutionary atonement. Our Socinian friends didn't think that Jesus died as a substitute. They thought he only died as a good model of compassion. That's certainly also true. But the substitution is here, as is also in Mark 10:15, where Jesus died in our place. That seems to be quite clear. Now, let's look at the history here. Having been put to death in the flesh, that's to say, as a mortal human being. The flesh is normally mortality, humanity, and so on. Flesh. He was put to death. If you're God, you cannot die. So if you believe that Jesus is God, you've actually put a red line through this passage. Don't do that. Put to death as a human being in the flesh, a mortal human being. But, by contrast, made alive. You see the difference in death and life here? He was made alive in the realm of spirit, as an invisible, non-mortal person now. You see the contrast, right? Death to life. He now has a spiritual body. Still a body, but it's spiritual. You don't see it until he shows up. But that's very clear. The contrast is absolutely clear between death and life there. Now, notice that he didn't do anything when he was dead. The idea that Jesus went off to preach to the spirits who are mistranslated now, and now shouldn't be there, he went and did that when he was dead, is flat wrong. When you're dead, you ain't doing nothing. We just read it there. That's clear. People don't understand that, and they traipse into church Sunday after Sunday, and they wonder why it's such a big muddle. Well, of course it is. So he was dead for 3 days, I think from Friday to Sunday, rose again in the Spirit on that Sunday morning, in which condition, right? In that immortalized condition, as a life-imparting Spirit, now immortal, he went off. That's a traveling word, by the way. It means he went off and did something. He moved from one place to another. You see it. It's right here in the context later as well. He went off. He went on a journey, we could say, to do what? To make proclamation to the spirits in prison. Here's the easy fact for you to investigate. Spirits, when used absolutely by itself, not spirits of just men, or my spirit, or God's spirit, but used absolutely without qualification, just spirits, it's angels or fallen angels, demons. So these things that he preached to, it's important to get them identified, are not human beings. You cannot call a group of human beings spirits. You could not say you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spirits absolutely in this room. We haven't. If there were 7 angels here, you could certainly say that. 7 angels. If there were 7 demons here, we could say 7 spirits. We could, meaning demons. But you have spirit, but you are not spirit. See the difference? You have a spirit of gentleness. You have a kind spirit, a gentle spirit. All of that is quite clear. And John in one place says, test the spirits. He means test what's coming out of the mouth of human beings. Got it? Spirits are not demons there. Not test the demons or the angels, but test the spirits, meaning test the utterances in that case. So as Bob said so well just recently, these words have different shades of meaning. You need a good lexicon to go through all this. It's a task. You need a standard lexicon, preferably Hebrew or Greek, if you can manage that, to see what these various words mean. So spirits here would be fallen angels. And that is made entirely clear. Because he then says, who? These are personalities, but they're spirits. What about them in verse 20? They were once disobedient. I get it. They were bad things, weren't they? They weren't good people. They weren't good people at all. They were bad spirits, in fact, who were disobedient. And then more information. When? We've got who and when. Isn't that amazing? Not only who are they, but when did they do what they did? When the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, my goodness. During, there's another time word, construction of the ark, in which a few, in the ark that is, 8 persons were brought safely through the water. Now he's talking about persons, and he's using the word souls there quite deliberately. Before that, he used the word spirits, which, used absolutely without qualification, means demonic fallen spirits. There's such a huge fuss about this, it makes me wonder if there isn't some serious Christian living here involved. What you're being led into is the worst catastrophe in human history, the flood, right? What was responsible for that flood was the awful event where some angels cohabited with women. That disrupted the whole human race. Now look at the news today. We're getting in a muddle over gender, aren't we? This is a catastrophe for the human race. You start mixing and muddling those things, you're in bad trouble. And here he's announcing his triumph to the fallen spirits. So this is not spirits without qualification, even in that passage. Here they are spirits who were disobedient when the ark was being prepared. Well, certainly there were human beings who were disobedient. There were at the time. However, Jesus wasn't alive at that time. So he couldn't have been doing the preaching. You see the sequence there? He died, he rose, and in that risen condition, he went off and preached to the spirits in prison who were disobedient in the time of Noah. It doesn't say that Jesus did it before he was born, does it? Hardly. The sequence is quite clear. Died, rose in spirit. In that spirit condition, he then took a journey to preach to spirits who had been disobedient at the time of the ark. There's a perfectly good reference for that, Genesis 6. It's a massive subject, please note. Genesis 6, right? This is the point at which the human race really fell apart, and Jesus and the New Testament warn that when the flood comes, when it came, right, that was the end of that civilization. Second coming is like the flood. It's the end of that civilization. And it is aided and abetted by false sexual relationships. We've seen that. He went off and preached to these spirits who were disobedient at the time of Noah. They were put in Tartarus, which is a lower level of Hades, waiting for final judgment. Remember the demons said, have you come to torture us before the time? That suggests there are demons both in Tartarus and others who are free. There are 2 Jews recognize that. Some of the demons are in prison waiting final judgment. Others are very much alive and well in the sublunar space. So our battle in Ephesians 5 is not against flesh and blood, i.e. human beings, not essentially. It doesn't mean it isn't against that, right? Not essentially. People stumble at that. No, not human beings, no. Not essentially, not finally and absolutely against human beings, but against exactly this cosmic chaos in heavenly places. So you've got to arm yourself with spiritual gifts and spiritual resistance. Jesus then finally in this passage makes this announcement. He's not preaching salvation to them. I don't think they're offered salvation. But he's announcing his triumph. He takes this journey to preach to the spirits in prison, the demons, to say he is now in charge of all authority under God, which is huge, isn't it? I think we don't estimate that highly enough.